Similarly, there is, in the process of evolution, if a tendency has to go out of nature, just before passing, it suddenly seems to rise in full swing. There is a very interesting observation that mother has made, very powerful. She says, just before dying, falsehood rises to its full swing. It's very interesting. As if it wants to put all its effort before it can be vanquished by truth. The same thing we find in Savitri's dialogue with death. Just before passing off, death gives a final cry. It says, "You have all the knowledge, I agree. Do you have the power?" And it falls upon the darkness, falls upon inconscience, falls upon the night. Because that's the worst stage. It's just going to pass away. Just before the sun comes. In fact, every day we observe it. The same process takes place. Night starts, first stage of night is stars come up, moon comes up, sun is set, but there are lights in the house, fire is lit. Now slowly, the sun doesn't rise, but the lights begin to go off. The fire, the lanterns, the lights, and then the stars begin to fade. And then sometimes the moon is about to set. And if somebody would wake up around that time, 2:30, 3 o'clock, one may well feel, my God, this is thick of night. But to those who know, they will say, no, this is the beginning of morning. So just like before going away, darkness shows its darkest side. So a tendency, before it passes out, there is a powerful recrudescence. And then Sri Aurobindo says, it is a principle of nature. It is not an exception to the rule. It is the principle of nature that in order to get rid of any powerful tendency or deep-seated associations in humanity, whether in the mass or in the individual, it has first to be exhausted. Now he is telling us 3 stages. It applies to individual evolution and to collectivity. So we should not worry, if we see so many things around in national and international life. What are the 3 stages? It has first to be exhausted by bhoga or enjoyment, afterwards to be dominated and weakened by nigraha or control, and finally, when it is weak, to be got rid of by sanyama, rejection or self-dissociation. These are the 3 stages. And each stage has its own validity. A child cannot be told, look, you must not live by the ego. It is a most foolish thing to tell the child. It should not be told that, look, you must master your desires. Poor fellow, he will not even, he'll become too timid, he'll become absolutely claustrophobic and unable to meet the world. On the contrary, he should be told, go out and conquer the world. Don't become a football at the mercy of anyone and everyone. But the same child, when a stage comes, he has to be told, look, now temper your egos. Try to put in a more enlightened way of looking at life. And it happens, even without our telling. This is the evolutionary process. And a time comes when he is ready to discard the ego and evolve out of the law of desire. So these are the 3 stages. So what is the difference between nigraha and sanyama? The difference is that in nigraha there is a violent struggle to crush the tendency. Now this is the problem that, especially that's why Sri Aurobindo says in one of his letters that I am not very keen to pull very young people into sadhana, especially adolescents. There were just very few, 2 or 3 adolescents who during the time of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, and one of them we know went through so much upheavals, so much difficulties. And the reason he says is because the nature is not yet ready. And what happens is that suddenly it is thrown into violent conflicts because the vital which is natural at this stage, that's how he puts it, which is natural at this stage comes out and there is an intense inner conflict. So at that point, if one tries to do nigraha, crush it by violence. The second is sanyama, where the quality is going to pass out. It is already a dead or dying force. One rejects it quietly, observes it and throws it out. Sanyama is unseasonable and would be fruitless when a force, quality, or tendency is in its infancy or vigor. In these two stages, and spiritual people know this law so beautifully. That's why Sri Aurobindo says the first thing is develop the psychic, develop that light, that capacity, that strength. And then when there are things, don't start fighting the toughest battle right away. So he says, Sanyama is unseasonable and would be fruitless when a force, quality, or tendency is in its infancy or vigor, before it has had the enjoyment and full activity which is its due. So in a tamasic state of humanity, if we start talking of meditation, and nowadays of course anyone and everyone, it's all free for all, it can be very dangerous, because a person finds a great justification for his inertia and inactivity, and he picks up Mayavad and high spiritual truths in the wrong way and misuses them, because he's not yet ready to understand their subtlety, their vastness, the truth which is behind them. When once a thing is born, it must have its youth, growth, enjoyment, life, and final decay and death. So we cannot crush nature out like that. When once an impetus has been given by Prakriti to her creation, she insists that the velocity shall spend itself by natural exhaustion. To arrest the growth or speed unseasonably by force is nigraha, which can be effective for a time but not in perpetuity. So the Gita tells us that what is the use of nigraha? That's what the Gita says, and now we understand why it tells Arjuna. It says, Arjuna, don't talk like a saint. What will happen is, you will say, I am not fighting the war. You will go on to the sidelines. Then you will say that, you will see that, Yudhishthir is captured. Then you will come rushing with your bow and arrow, because it's your nature, it's your pravrti. You have to put it to the right use under the guidance of an enlightened will. If you try to do it prematurely, eventually it will fail. And this is what we see the same truth revealed in Homer's Iliad. Achilles says, I am not going to fight, because who is this woman? Briseis, he is taken up by the king, and he refuses to fight. But eventually he is pulled out because his nephew is killed. And then he fights a fierce and a violent, almost a gory battle. So this tendency, if we try to forcibly suppress it, it remains in the background but will come out. What happens then is that the thing untimely slain by violence is not really dead, but withdraws into the Prakriti which sent it forth, gathers an immense force, and returns with extraordinary violence. And this is what happens and is happening when sannyasis try to enter into the field of life. What they forget is that sannyasi, the rule was very different. You go, you walk out of life, fine, no problem. The moment they enter into life, all the tendency, the lust for money and everything else come back with a violence, because it has not been eliminated from nature, it has just gone within Prakriti. And if they enter into the field of life, Prakriti has its say. Ravening for the rightful enjoyment which it was denied. We see this in the attempts we make to get rid of our evil sanskaras or association when we first tread the path of yoga. If anger is a powerful element in our nature, we may put it down for a time by sheer force and call it self-control. But eventually, unsatisfied nature will get the better of us, and the passion return upon us with astonishing force at an unexpected moment. And the history of spirituality is full of such examples. Durvasa and Vishwamitra, classic examples. Even Rishi Vasisht, with that state of development, when his sons were killed, he is moved by deep sorrow and wanted to jump into the river and die. And the river had to split his chains. That's how the river is called Vipasha. Because when he jumped into the river, tying himself with chains, as the legend goes, the river was horrified. Nature was shaken because he has arrived at a great degree of development. He cannot die like this. So it seems that the river cut away his chains by some means, whatever be the physical process used. and that's how the river, it's still there, is called Vipasha. There are only two ways by which we can effectively get the better of the passion which seeks to enslave us. So there are two ways, he tells us. The first is the Rajyogic way, by substitution. What is substitution? It is replacing the quality whenever it rises by the opposite quality. Anger by thoughts of forgiveness, love or forbearance, lust by meditation on purity, pride by thoughts of humility and our own defects or nothingness. This is the method of Raj Yoga. We know Yama, Niyama and Sanyama which is practiced. So the whole principle is that whenever we have a tendency, we bring in its opposite. So if we have anger, we bring in peace, we bring in forgiveness, we bring in forbearance, we bring in love, we bring in charity, etc., etc. Whenever we are plagued with thoughts of lust, we meditate upon purity. Similarly, when we are moved by greed, we can equally practice the sense of satisfaction, the sense of control, and pride by thoughts of humility. This is the method of Raj Yoga, but it is a difficult, slow and uncertain method. But Aurobindo says that this method, nature uses this method over a period of time. So this is the method that nature also uses in the cycles of rebirth, that it tries to slowly substitute one quality for another. So in few lives, a person was terribly egoistic in a Rajasic way. After some time, one is born with the first awakening of Sattva. So ego is still there, but it turns into a Sattvic ego. So this is the method nature uses. It does not destroy things in their seed, and the seed which is not reduced to ashes by yoga is always capable of sprouting again and growing into the complete and mighty tree. So this is the danger. The seed remains and it can sprout again. So while this method is all right for liberation, but for transformation it is not enough. So what is the second method? The second method is to give bhoga or enjoyment to the passion so as to get rid of it quickly. This is another method that nature uses. And again we have a classic example of Gautama Buddha, that the first 21 years of his life, it is said that he was simply leading a life of apparent luxury. We don't know exactly what his inner life was, but outwardly a life which was very much like any other life, amid sensual enjoyments, luxury, comfort and everything. It is said that this was that last hold of those sanskaras which he was ready to shake off. And once that exhaustion is over, he is ready and the change takes place. Now when that change will take place, we do not know. There are human beings who outwardly may appear that they are subject to a tendency, but inwardly they are reaching that tipping point, as they say in today's language. And there is a very interesting story. It is a short story of a lady and her husband. They used to always quarrel, and the lady would always say, I am going to go away here, I am going to go away to my parents' place, I am going to go away to this relative, or I am going to take sannyas. So this man was hearing for many years. So one day he was going for bath with his towel, and again, the lady, it could apply the other way around. Well, one should take it, the sense of the story. So the lady, of course, again started telling him that, you are this, you are that, I am going to go away. So he said, wait, just hold on. I'll tell you how to go away. He took the towel, handed over to her. He says, here I go. And he left. Now, this is just when a tendency is reaching a point where one little thing and it tips totally on another side. Now, how does that work? When it is satiated and surfeited by excessive enjoyment, it becomes weak and spent. Now, what the problem here is that there is no way that desire can ever be fully satisfied. But there is a point when just after anger, one is feeling weak, exhausted, empty. That point, if one can see, so Aurobindo is revealing to us that a reaction ensues which establishes for a time the opposite force, tendency, or quality. One feels horrible that, why did I get angry? If that moment is seized by the yogin for nigraha, the nigraha so repeated at every suitable opportunity becomes effective as to reduce the strength and vitality of the vritti sufficiently for the application of sanyama. This is a very, very deep and profound psychology. Because one cannot take a leap. If when a tendency is in its youthful vigor, if one tries to apply nigraha, violent suppression, it doesn't work. It will erupt. But every time it erupts, there is a period which follows, a gap. And at that point of time, if one takes the resolve and controls it, even that may fail few times. But if that moment is seized, instead of wallowing in depression and guilt and all kinds of things, that moment is seized to attack it. It's weakest, it's sleeping. Just again, the battle of Troy. So there is a point when the war has exhausted everybody. So what is the master plan that Odysseus brings? It's exactly the same psychological process. He said, look, the best way to make them feel weak is to delude them into the belief that they have won. So, the ships go behind, it's a strategic retreat, and they have already a plan. So the Trojan horse is put inside, and everybody believes they have won the battle, and that's the point when all these warriors are drinking, sleeping, and few handful of warriors come out of the horse and slay the entire army. So this is where nigraha can work, that when a tendency is exhausted, they were so exhausted that they couldn't keep vigil. Even for one night, that was the state of affairs. Then Sanyama can work. Nigraha and Sanyama can work. This method also Sri Aurobindo would tell us that nature uses, but the problem is that it's never complete. And sometimes it can establish a seesaw. And Sri Aurobindo describes it very beautifully when he speaks of human relationship. He speaks of that Rajasic type of relationship, separating to unite and uniting to separate. So it establishes a seesaw. So sometimes this tendency is higher, sometimes the other. Extremely useful to the operations of Prakriti, but from the point of view of self-mastery, useless and inconclusive. So both methods have their problem. It is only when this method is followed up by the use of Sanyama that it becomes effective. So what is Sanyama? The yogin regards the vritti merely as a play of nature with which he is not concerned and of which he is merely the spectator. Last time also we read earlier also that the first thing we have to step back and practice the witness attitude towards tendencies which rise within nature. Witness attitude is not so much about things happening outside, but one is a witness of one's own nature. The anger, lust or pride is not his. It is the universal mother's, and she works it and stills it for her own purposes. When, however, the vritti is strong, mastering and unspent, this attitude cannot be maintained in sincerity. And to try to hold it intellectually without sincerely feeling it is mithyachar, false discipline or hypocrisy. Yoga is such a subtle psychology that while we have to stand back, but if it is just that the mind is standing back, but the feeling and everything is impelled to act in it, and if we do it, we can end up with another kind of situation where we become intellectually opponents of a certain tendency, but secretly nourishing it and nurturing it. And that is very dangerous because, subtly we enjoy a particular quality or give it expression in certain ways which seem to be acceptable, whereas intellectually we strongly and violently oppose it. So that leads to mithyachar. It is only when it is somewhat exhausted by repeated enjoyment and coercion that Prakriti or nature, at the command of the soul, can really deal with her own creation. She deals with it first by vairagya. So how does it deal with it? First step is it creates a disgust for a tendency. We know that story. We have 3-4 minutes. We'll be finishing it. The story of Vibhishna. So Vibhishna has, he's a non-vegetarian. After all, he's in Lanka. He's a Rakshasa by birth. All said and done, tendencies are there. So when he comes with Rama, So everybody, all the monkeys are a bit scared, that he's after all a non-vegetarian asura. Why are you calling him to Ayodhya? Give him Lanka and let him stay there. So Rama says, don't worry, I know it's my game. So he comes and all the monkeys are very, very concerned. So one day, one monkey sees that Vibhishna feels like having non-veg. So he goes, and quietly when nobody is around, he picks up a rabbit and gulps it. So one monkey comes and reports, then the whole chain. By the time it reaches Rama, he says, Vibhishna has killed someone. So Rama says, has any monkey been reduced in the kingdom? They say no. He says, go, be quiet. Next time, again after a few months, Vibhishna has this tendency. He goes out. But this time when he eats the rabbit, he feels like vomiting. And the third time when he eats it, he says, my God, what am I doing? It's horrible. So there is this sudden vairagya which develops over a period of time, and the same thing which was giving enjoyment and pleasure one begins to feel a disgust at a point of time. So this is true vairagya, and not the tamasic vairagya where one turns away from life because one cannot enjoy it. It is the vairagya of the toothless man who became a vegetarian overnight because he didn't have tooth anymore, so he couldn't eat meat. So he became vegetarian and proclaimed it that I have become a vegetarian from today. That vairagya is meaningless. So the true vairagya is where one begins to feel inwardly a disgust. She deals with it first by vairagya in its crudest form of disgust. But this is too violent a feeling to be permanent. Yet it leaves its mark. Then next, it slowly begins to get rid of the cause which survives the return and temporary reign of the passion. Afterwards, its return is viewed with impatience, but without any acute feeling of intolerance. The problem is with vairagya is there is a feeling of disgust which can be accompanied by all kinds of negative reactions, depression, guilt, etc., etc. But the other is when one stands back and there is no intolerance, though the vairagya is there. And that is the stage of udasinata. There is a supreme indifference or udasinata is gained, and the final going out of the tendency by the ordinary process of nature is washed in the true spirit of Sanyama. Who has the knowledge, is washed in the true spirit of the Sanyami, who has the knowledge that he is the witnessing soul and has only to dissociate himself from a phenomena for it to cease. So basically we have to practice this dissociation after a while because we don't give the sanction. The will is not going actively in that direction. The tendency will be there, but it is becoming weak. First inside, it has to begin from within outward, the change begins to come. There is within a distaste for the tendency, a vairagya. Then there is slowly a developing disgust. And then there is a lack of taste, udasinta. Actually, that is one is indifferent to its coming and going. It doesn't leave one shattered and shaken. And finally, it passes out of nature. And that stage, the highest stage, leads either to mukti in the form of lay or disappearance, the vritti vanishing altogether and for good. Or else, now this is very interesting, Aurobindo gives us another secret. Or else to another kind of freedom when the soul knows that it is God's Leela and leaves it to him, whether he shall throw out the tendency or use it for his own purposes. In one place, in one of our prayers, Mother says, some apparent defects of nature are more useful from the point of view of the work. And how are we to understand it? But for the anger of Bhima, but for the pride of Arjuna, Mahabharata would not be. It was necessary. If they were all like, Khartal brandishing sannyasis, then much of God's work would have remained. So, when we surrender that tendency, then it's up to Him. And then finally, it can also undergo a transmutation, that of which it is a shadow. So, anger can change into Rudra energies. Rudra energies can change into Kali Bhav. But of course, it's a whole process. Unless one is established, as Aurobindo says, who can bear the onrush of Kali? It's very easy to get angry and say it's Kali. Who can bear the onrush of Kali? And he says, he whom Krishna already possesses. It's when sweetness and ananda of the divine is flowing in our veins like soma of the Vedic rishis, that we can bear that onrush and we can be truly free. So this is the process. Finally, the result of that attitude of self-surrender is that the Lord of all takes charge and according to the promise of the Gita delivers his servant and lover from all sin and evil. The vrittis working in the bodily machine without affecting the soul and working only when he raises them up for his purposes. This is nirliptata. So we can either take the path of mukti or nirliptata, where there is no individual claim at all. The state of absolute freedom within the Leela. Of course, to this process we can add one master stroke, which comes later. That all this nigraha, sanyama, nirliptata, udasinta, etc., etc., he has made it much easier. And that is, we have the additional great boon and privilege that we can open to the mother and her grace. Because the more it enters into the nature, the more it clears the passage for the change or the passing away of these vrittis. So to open to her is of course the simplest and the last secret. This is for those who want to do yoga. But to those who want to do it the shorter way, the method is to open oneself to the mother like a baby cat putting herself in the hands of the mother cat. When mother was asked, this is an anecdote with which we can end. She was asked, "Mother, in front of you bad thoughts come to us, what should we do?" She says, "What is there, my child? They come to be eliminated." Same process. All that is hidden emerges. And it emerges so that she can, by one glance, throw it away from her nature. We will be stopping for the next 3 or 4 weeks. I'm going out, though 3 weeks I'll be back, but maybe one more week. Tuesday classes we won't be having. We'll close with these lines. A vast surrender was his only strength.